Greetings!
So how can we fix this? Or better question, how can they fix this, since the ball's not really in our court anymore? Or an even better question, should we try to fix it? Is it just too far gone, or too obsolete of a concept? See, here's the thing, I don't think it's obsolete. In fact, I 100% think that it's not only worth fixing, but necessary if we want to see the game grow in a more sustainable way. Because once again, the key to a sustainable, long-standing game of this sort is versatility and flexibility in playstyle. Furthermore, it's granting players the agency to decide how they play. Even if nobody wants to use secondary classes anymore, the option should still remain, and it should stay viable. So that brings us back to the question of how do we do it? How can KingsIsle make secondary schools a viable option again? After taking a look at what the shortcomings are as it stands, I think there are 3 important aspects that need to be adjusted. Number 1, we don't need better gear, we need more diverse gear. We need gear that doesn't render us defenseless just for wanting to deal damage in multiple schools. We need gear that can be selected based on what we're trying to do, without compromising our ability to survive by giving up stats like resistance, accuracy, and health. More multi-classing friendly gear, more universal gear, better and more accessible mastery amulets, and no more filler gear! Nobody is ever going to buy or keep that ugly-ass Celestian stuff with worse stats and no potential for stitching, when they could just keep the Hangman's Hood they've had for 40 levels or so. This would be an excellent place to build on the set bonuses we've seen on some of the newer gear sets as well. Number 2, and this is a big one, secondary schools are only as good as the spells available from them. The Arcanum's edition of the rank 7 spells for all schools and a few other lore spells was a great start, but we need more. What about access to utility spells that those classes have had for eons? What about access to blade spells? I think it's been long enough without those. What harm really comes of giving off-school wizards access to Myth, Storm, and Ice Blades, to the Red Ghost spell, to Snowball Strike? The one that comes from the Snowball pet, not the Shadow one. Then, as more updates get released, we can work towards the higher rank spells so that every class still gets to feel special that they had it first and for longer. Additionally, I'm going to take a page out of Pirate 101's book for this, again, but I think some passive stats, much like the passive powers used by that game's classes, would be a very welcome addition. You could even keep with the lore of the game by calling them attunements, or rituals, or affinities, something magical and passive like that, who cares? They could be anything. Death could receive a 20% natural resistance to damage they deal to themselves, since a lot of their spells do that, while Fire gains additional damage with each stacked damage over time spell. Storm could gain a 10% accuracy buff every time they fizzle, until they eventually succeed in casting and it resets. Or that could be something similar in regards to damage. Ice could have passive universal resistance, while Balance could have passive universal damage or accuracy. Life could have innate outgoing healing buffs, and Myth could have a higher base power pip chance or pip conversion rate. These passive benefits could scale with player level and be available to anyone who trains into the school. The possibilities are endless, and the implementation could be seamless and easy. And number 3. In addition to a better tutorial providing examples of the newfound versatility, KingsIsle needs to promote community engagement with this concept. They need to be transparent, and they need to make sure that people have no evidence to support their claims that there's only one way to play. People will still say it, of course, it's a video game after all. But KingsIsle hasn't done much to prove those accusations wrong. They've only reinforced the fact that the meta is what it is and can't be challenged. What they should be doing is promoting an atmosphere that allows players the freedom to pursue different ideas and options in as much of a judgment-free zone as possible. This begins with more in-depth tutorials teaching new players how to make decisions for themselves within the boundaries of the game. I mean, the game is set in a fucking school for Wu's sake. You'd think there would be a more positive attitude toward forging one's own path and learning. But ultimately, whether KingsIsle makes any changes, whether they be the ones I've listed or something that I haven't even thought of, the task falls to us, the players, to keep experimenting and keep coming up with new ways to reinvent our playstyles, redefine what constitutes a viable strategy, and do our best to rewrite the meta as often as possible. A meta should never be stagnant. To give you an idea of the fun you can have with different secondary schools, I'd like to share with you what I've done with my 7 wizards and their training points. They're mostly for roleplay reasons, and you may not like them, but this is my account and my channel, so here we go. Talon Ravenblood, a Marleybonian necromancer, has taken up conjuration as a way of connecting with who he once was. A former vigilante, he died a myth wizard and was resurrected by Raven, infusing him with necromantic energies and leaving his myth magic a distant memory, a relic of a past life. On a technical note, this was before Scarecrow's release, so I just needed some AoE action. Ulrich Ravenblood, meanwhile, has always shown a proclivity for conjuration, and only began to expand his studies to include life magic after a ritual near Buttlebee's roots put him in touch with the great tree's song of creation. He took up a mandolin and has blended storytelling with music ever since, learning many of his signature spells from his good friend Ian, fellow Wizard City native and self-proclaimed Theurgist Supreme. While the healing spells are useful for any PvE situation, spells like Satyr and Centaur just worked exceptionally well with the mythological themes of this class. Ian Ravenblood, Ulrich's friend and an infamously shrewd dealer of items both magical and mundane, was a Theurgist before it was cool, and won't let anyone forget it. However, his interest in sorcery sprung up when Arthur Weathersfield charged him with playing guide to a new student, Carrick. The young wizard's timid nature and surprising power over balance and death intrigued Ian, and instilled in him a desire to learn more about balance's role in the fabric of life. Carrick Ravenblood, while happy to show Ian what he knew of sorcery, didn't learn his spells in a very traditional way. With a blurred past and nowhere to go, he drifted from world to world, ending up in many corners of the spiral, including Mirage, Marleybone, and a world he didn't recognize, but that he would later learn to be called Valencia. Eventually, he found himself in Krokotopia, cared for by the great Alhazred, and taught the importance of preserving balance by respecting and caring for the dead. It was here that his affinity for necromancy became apparent, and he was sent to Wizard City to learn more about his role in the preservation of the threads of order that make up the spiral. Cain Ravenblood, a thaumaturge on the other hand, has never had much luck with his secondary school. With connections to both the Dragon and the Ice Titans, his preference for ice magic made it difficult to come to terms with his fiery lineage, igniting a conflict inside him that threatens every move he makes. The form given to him by Raven is constantly under siege by his conflicting nature, giving him an additional connection to Mallory, though he doesn't know it yet. This one was entirely for roleplay purposes. I loved the concept of a Percy Jackson-esque demigod with connections to First World beings and an internal struggle a la Shoto Todoroki or Prince Zuko. Realistically, he didn't need to have a secondary school at all, as Ice is one of the easier classes to solo with, but I liked the idea of a roleplay-based challenge. Valdis and Arlen Ravenblood are the only actual brothers amongst the Ravenblood house. Both have Fey-like dispositions and personalities, reminiscent of Dahlia Falmea and the Avalon Elves, but they owe their proclivities for life magic to their mother, Sylvia Drake. Neither inherited much from their father, instead finding their own paths through the titans that favored them. Valdis would receive visions from the Dragon Titan while attending Dragonspire Academy, awakening the furnace within him, while Arlen's dreams were dominated by visions of a storm-wrought world and a furious sleeping giant. Some nights he'd awaken in whatever body of water was closest, skin crackling with electricity and heart humming with an unfamiliar current. Like I said, my decisions were based mostly on how I wanted to roleplay things, so technical synergy wasn't always a factor in what I chose. But at the end of the day, whatever you choose should be viable if it's fun, because at the end of the day, Wizard101 is a game, and games should be fun. There's no real wrong answer if you're having a good time with it. Only time will tell if KingsIsle remembers that or not. Until then, I'm Mad Jack, and this has been 7 Ravens.